The Ukrainian army continues its offensive. Ukrainians are exerting immense pressure on the Russian defense line through concentrated artillery fire from all types of guns, ranging from the smallest to the largest. Take a look at how skillfully and accurately the Ukrainian forces are using precision-guided munitions like the Excalibur. Today, I'll show you the best moments of the combat actions. In this video, you can see a Russian self-propelled howitzer 2S9 taking position in a forested area. The Ukrainian forces noticed it and delivered a precise strike with just a single projectile. It resulted in a massive explosion since the ammunition detonated along with the howitzer. The Russian tank attempted to hide from the Ukrainian artillery behind the trees, but the Ukrainian reconnaissance spotted its location. A precision strike with an Excalibur guided projectile was launched against the tank. The result is evident. Here's another instance where a Russian modern tank, the T-90, was detected by Ukrainian aerial reconnaissance. It was targeted with an Excalibur projectile and destroyed. Additionally, the Excalibur projectile destroys numerous Russian artillery systems like the 2S-19 and Grad BM-1, as well as multiple ammunition depots hidden by the Russians in abandoned houses and gardens. Watch how the projectiles explode and scatter in different directions. The Excalibur is a highly advanced 155mm caliber projectile equipped with GPS guidance and can be fired from almost any NATO standard 155mm howitzer. It is evident that in preparation for the offensive, the Ukrainian army has stockpiled a sufficient number of such projectiles to destroy hundreds or even thousands of units of Russian equipment. Economically, this is also a favorable exchange. The cost of a single projectile is approximately $100,000, whereas it can destroy a tank worth $3 million or other significant Russian equipment. Interestingly, the Russians do not possess such highly accurate artillery capabilities. As a result, in order to hit a target, the Russians have to use hundreds of projectiles and old 40-year-old howitzers or resort to multiple rocket launch systems. Consequently, the Russians will sooner or later experience a severe shortage of ammunition. In their attempts to halt the Ukrainian offensive, the Russians are conducting clumsy counterattacks, but they are losing even more armored vehicles. The Russians are repelling tank attacks using RPGs. The camera on a Ukrainian tank captured the moment when an anti-tank grenade flew past the tank. A minute later, another grenade struck the tank. Here are two Russian tanks that ventured out for a counterattack, but the Ukrainians destroyed one of the tanks with a precise hit from an anti-tank missile. Shortly after, another tank was destroyed. Crew couldn't control the tank and sent it into a ditch. Later, the tank exploded and turned it into scrap metal. On another front segment, the Russians attacked Ukrainian positions with the assistance of 3 tanks. However, under the pressure of Ukrainian artillery, all 3 tanks were damaged. One of the tanks had its turret blown off, as is typical with Russian tanks. By the way, this is a significant difference between German tanks and Russian tanks. For instance, in this video, you can see how a Russian drone, the Lancet, hit a German Leopard tank and ignited it from the inside. However, the tank's turret wasn't blown off because all its ammunition was stored in a separate compartment. If a Russian tank catches fire with ammunition inside, it will most likely explode. We have witnessed numerous cases where Russian tanks have their turrets blown off. Another Russian tank approached close to the Ukrainian positions and was spotted by reconnaissance. With the help of a kamikaze drone, the tank was successfully ignited. The Russians tried to extinguish it but failed. They abandoned the tank and fled while the tank burned down completely. However, to be objective, it must be acknowledged that the Russians also managed to inflict painful losses on the Ukrainian forces. For example, the Russians found and destroyed a Ukrainian 2S1 artillery system along with its ammunition. Ukrainian army also suffers significant losses from Russian kamikaze drones like the Lancet. Here's an instance where such a drone destroys a Ukrainian S-300 air defense complex. Here's another such case. These are very painful losses for the Ukrainians. And here, the Lancet destroys Ukrainian armored vehicles. The Lancet is also capable of destroying Ukrainian tanks. In this video, we can see how the Russians tracked a Ukrainian Grad multiple rocket launcher system. and destroyed it using the same Lancet drone. Here's the destruction of a Western-made Ukrainian armored vehicle, and logistics vehicles as well. However, in response, the Ukrainians launched massive attacks using FPV drones, destroying even more Russian armored vehicles. I can make a video several hours long, showing the extensive losses of Russian military equipment from the strikes of Ukrainian army drones. The Russians know how dangerous these small Ukrainian drones are and fear them so much. As soon as they spot a Ukrainian drone nearby, they immediately abandon their armored vehicles and flee. The Ukrainian forces have also perfected their aerial reconnaissance on the battlefield. It involves a drone capable of dropping grenades. This weapon should not be underestimated. The drone can locate an ammunition depot and destroy it with just a single grenade. Moreover, the drones are capable of destroying a vast number of armored Russian vehicles. Perhaps no other weapon has destroyed as much armored machinery as the bomber drones. Nothing can compare to this weapon on the front lines of combat. The Russians do not know how to combat drones. They have no solution to this problem. As the Ukrainians advance, they attack Russian positions with the support of tanks. However, during the offensive, the Ukrainians have to clear mines from roads and fields to allow their armored vehicles to pass through. The Russians have created heavily mined areas, and the Ukrainians have to spend a lot of time and effort to breach the minefields. To understand the extent to which the Russians have mined Ukrainian fields and roads, take a look at this video. A Ukrainian armored transporter was returning to the rear, but even there, it encountered a mine and detonated. And even the Russians sometimes fall to their own mines. For example, a Russian tank was returning to its positions and detonated on its own mine. The video clearly shows a minefield nearby. It appears that the tank accidentally drove over one of the mines. The Russians abandoned that tank. Here's another Russian tank that detonated on its own mine. The Russians abandoned the tank and fled the battlefield. The Ukrainian soldiers destroyed the tank using a kamikaze drone. And sometimes, mines behave very deceitfully and unpredictably. In this video, 2 Ukrainian armored transporters are moving along the road. The first one passed through a mined area unharmed, while the second one detonated on a mine. To clear the passages, Ukrainian forces use specialized demining vehicles. The process itself looks very impressive, but takes a lot of time. Sometimes, demining operations are conducted during offensive operations. It is a complex task that requires a high level of coordination among all units. Ukrainian sapper teams are working in the liberated territories. This is also a very complex job. The discovered Russian mines are collected and then destroyed by detonating them together. Ukrainian generals, led by Mr. Zaholzny, have focused on destroying Russian logistics. They are destroying bridges and ammunition depots belonging to the Russians. Recently, Ukrainian aviation targeted and destroyed a bridge that served as the route for 70% of ammunition supplies to Russian forces. Additionally, Ukrainians systematically destroy Russian fuel reserves and ammunition depots. Several large ammunition storage facilities have been destroyed in the past weeks. Sooner or later, this will have an impact on the Russian strategic defense, and it will be breached. No matter how much military equipment and personnel you have, if you lack ammunition, you will lose. Ultimately, the war will be won by those who have better logistics and provisions. In this video, you can see a Russian tank that got blown up by a mine. Its torn track is evidence of that. The tank crew hastily abandons their tank, taking only the most valuable belongings. Just a few minutes ago, this tank was returning to the rear after completing a combat mission when it was hit by a Russian mine. However, the mines were not camouflaged. We can even see them from above. We have another video taken from a different angle where it is also evident that mines are placed on the road, but the crew's still driving forward. They abandon their tank, and the Ukrainians destroy it shortly afterward with an anti-tank missile. Similar situations often occur with Russian tank crews. After the battle, they return to their original positions and get blown up by their own mines. Typically, they abandon their tanks and flee, and the Ukrainians destroy them. By the way, pay attention. In this video, you can clearly see the flight of an anti-tank missile. It's most likely a Javelin. But Ukrainian forces also occasionally fall into mine traps. The Ukrainian armored personnel carrier arrived to pick up soldiers from the front lines for rotation. However, When it was returning and crossing the road, it got hit by a mine. There might have been multiple mines there, judging by the intensity of the explosion. In this video footage, the Russians were launching a counterattack, but ended up losing all their tanks to the mine barrier set up by Ukrainian soldiers. The front line is so saturated with mines that neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians can advance quickly. The Russians have mined vast areas, dug numerous trenches, and filled them with personnel. However, the United States plans to provide the Ukrainian army with cluster munitions. These projectiles can more efficiently target enemy personnel and lightly armored vehicles over larger areas. This will fundamentally change the situation on the front line and allow the Ukrainians to advance much faster. Ukrainian forces are increasingly using the HIMARS and M270 rocket launchers to directly destroy Russian military equipment. Aerial reconnaissance has located 2 Russian BM-21 Grad rocket artillery systems. They will now be destroyed by a HIMARS missile. Just a reminder, the Russian BM-21 Grad is the most common multiple rocket launcher system in the Russian army. So, the HIMARS delivers a missile strike. The Grad BM is destroyed. It's on fire, and then all its projectiles explode. The second HIMARS missile destroyed another Grad BM launcher. Another Grad BM launcher was detected nearby and also destroyed by a HIMARS missile. This is a routine and daily practice. Here's another Grad launcher, and once again the HIMARS missile hits its target. And now we have a large caliber target. A Russian self-propelled howitzer, the 2 S-19, is hiding among the trees. However, the HIMARS missile destroys it. Another 2 S-19 self-propelled howitzer is destroyed by a HIMARS missile. The Russian self-propelled artillery system Tornado is also positioned amidst the green trees. The HIMARS receives the coordinates and delivers a missile strike to that location. And although the missile hit very close, you have no doubt that the target is affected. The destructive power of the M31A1 missile is enormous. The warhead of the missile can impact targets within a radius of up to 150 meters from the point of detonation. Pay attention to this powerful explosion. It's the explosion of a Russian armored personnel carrier. Sometimes, the Russians load explosives into armored vehicles and send them towards Ukrainian positions. However, the Ukrainians detonate them in advance. In this forest plantation, one such armored personnel carrier loaded with explosives was stopped. It caught fire and later exploded. An explosion of such magnitude can destroy a fortified bunker, which is why the Russians use this tactic. Now, here's a unique video. The Russians hastily abandoned the armored vehicle filled with explosives. According to their plan, this armored vehicle was supposed to reach the Ukrainian bunker on its own and detonate it. However, the Ukrainians destroy this armored personnel carrier in advance using an anti-tank missile. Here's another example. A Russian armored personnel carrier was moving towards Ukrainian positions. Ukrainian soldiers fired an anti-tank missile at it. The enormous explosion once again proves that there was a significant amount of explosive material in the vehicle. And here, the Russians loaded an old T-55 tank with 6 tons of TNT. The Ukrainians hit it with a grenade launcher, causing an explosion with an incredible force of the blast wave. Ukrainian artillery is also destroying another important Russian equipment. Reconnaissance has detected the Uragan multiple rocket launcher system. This system launches unguided rockets with significant destructive power. Using the Uragan systems, the Russians daily shelled Ukrainian cities near the front lines, causing significant damage to the infrastructure. And with just a single Excalibur projectile, they managed to hit the target and destroy this devastating Russian weapon. And here's the destruction of the 2 S-5 artillery system using a HIMARS missile. The Russians concealed the SA-15 Gauntlet surface-to-air missile system among the trees. It is designed to engage and destroy aerial targets, including aircraft, helicopters, and unmanned aerial vehicles. It is a highly valuable weapon worth up to $10 million. But the Ukrainians tracked its coordinates and destroyed it with just one HIMARS missile. The uncontrolled explosion of ammunition confirms the destruction of the system. It is evident that the Ukrainian army has accumulated enough HIMARS ammunition to actively employ them during their counteroffensive. Currently, The command of the Ukrainian army is focused on destroying as much Russian artillery and other military capabilities as possible, and only then will it be possible to deliver the main strike and break through the Russian defense. One of the main tasks is to destroy as many Russian ammunition as possible, which they typically hide among thickets and trees. Take a look at this video. Ukrainian reconnaissance found a bunch of Russian anti-tank mines among the trees. To destroy it, it was enough to drop one grenade from a drone. The explosion created a crater in the ground, and all the trees burned down. In this video, we can witness the detonation of a large number of ammunition hidden among the trees. Recently, the Ukrainians tracked down a large ammunition depot and abandoned buildings on the outskirts of the city of Donetsk. During the night, a precise missile strike was carried out on this depot using HIMARS. The ammunition immediately started detonating and scattering in all directions, but after just a few seconds, a massive explosion occurred, illuminating the entire city. One of the local residents managed to capture that moment on video. But that's not the biggest explosion in the city. The largest explosion during this war occurred in the Ukrainian city of Khmelnytsky. The Russians hit warehouses where outdated ammunition was stored. When the ammunition exploded, many thought that the Russians had used tactical nuclear weapons because it resembled a so-called nuclear mushroom cloud. Fortunately, the city didn't suffer much damage as the warehouses were located on the premises of a disposal plant. The Russians are afraid to concentrate a large number of ammunition in one place to avoid the Ukrainians destroying them. Therefore, they disperse the majority of their ammunition. Some of them are hidden in small batches in forest plantations. Ukrainian aerial reconnaissance constantly searches for and destroys such depots. Part of the ammunition is constantly on wheels. They are transported directly from rear depots to the front. Aerial reconnaissance also helps in destroying trucks carrying ammunition. Thus, step by step, the Ukrainians are clearing their land from enemy forces, and if Western countries continue to support the Ukrainian army, Ukraine will inevitably emerge victorious. I want to remind you that Ukraine is supported by over 50 countries worldwide. The combined GDP of all these countries exceeds 60% of the global economy, while Russia's economic capabilities do not exceed 1% of the world's volume. This indicates that Russia has no chances of winning this war.